Welcome to Clearing the Clutter Inside and Out with Julie Coraccio. Every Tuesday at 1 p.m., Julie interviews experts on all areas of clutter: physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional. A clutter coach and professional organizer, Julie also offers tips to help you get clutter-free for a more joyful and fulfilling life.
I would like to thank today's sponsor, RYB Professional Writing Services. They are certified professional grant writers and also pen press releases and social media copy to get the word out about your business. For more information, please visit reawakenyourbrilliance.com/writing. You know, you've probably seen the Hoarder show on TV and how they go in and clean up everything, but what about afterwards? How is a community affected? There are things like fire costs, police costs, lost rent depending on the situation. I once read a statistic that in 2009, the city of San Francisco lost over $6 million in such services from hoarders, and that's just in 1 year. We're going to talk about hoarding today and why you need to know information and why it's important that we realize it's a community issue. With a history of moves and transitions, Susan Gardner has finessed sorting through possessions. She helps people clarify their priorities while navigating layers of belongings and emotions. Finding homes for the different types of things in our space brings great joy and satisfaction, a trait that becomes contagious in the organizing experience. Susan enjoys living in the Nashville area with the richness of natural beauty, artistic expression, and diverse community. Especially, she enjoys being part of groups that increase our community's sustainability through ecological and lifestyle shifts, enriching local neighborhood and regional life. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
How would someone know if they or someone they know is a hoarder?
They would have a whole lot of stuff, and they would not be able, with all of this stuff, to use their house in the way that is normal. It may be that the couch there's 12 inches for sitting, and the rest of the couch is filled up with paper, magazines, stuffed animals, you name it. And if there's a lot of stuff and more stuff coming into your house than is going out of your house, that would be a definite sign that a person is hoarding. In the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Health Disorders, hoarding has been listed now as its own separate disorder, and there are the things that say that you're a hoarder is you acquire excessively and have more stuff that is coming into your house than is going out of your house, and that there is distress with the idea of discarding. The second is that the house is not able to be used in its intended purposes. And then the third thing is that there is clinical distress in relationships and in your daily life. Sometimes this is added with poor insight, that it's hard for us to see this. But if a hoarder is ready to see the stuff around them, then they are at a good place to begin addressing their life. And if you're asking, could I be a hoarder? That's a good reason to go take a serious look at the stuff that you have around you.
Why should people care if they aren't hoarders or they don't know someone is and they're not personally affected by it?
Because we are interconnected as people, and what affects you affects me. And the reality is that about 1 in 30 people do hoard. Rarely do I go and speak with a person and tell them that I work specifically with those who hoard or are chronically disorganized, that they don't say, oh, my aunt, my boyfriend, my cousin, I think my neighbor may be a hoarder. That 1 in 30 is very easy to believe. We used to call them pack rats, and I can remember as a child I went into the home with my parents of a doctor, And that was the first time I had walked through goat paths. And there were all these medical journals, newspapers, magazines stacked up on both sides. And then we went into a room, and there were more treasures in there than I could ever imagine seeing. I would love to go back to that room knowing what I know now and see exactly what this woman had hoarded. But there was just enough room for the four of us to sit, and no more room than that.
How does hoarding affect our relationships?
If you're living with a person who hoards, every aspect of your relationship is taken up in some degree with the stuff that is there. In some houses, a person can be a hoarder, but they can have the front rooms clean and organized and orderly. But often that is because the non-hoarding person has taken it upon themselves to fix things and to keep it together. And that expends a tremendous amount of emotional and relational energy. And then if you go back into a bedroom that is stacked up with clothes, stacked up with boxes of shoes, stacked up, one of the normal things to find in the home of someone who hoards or is chronically disorganized are containers, things to organize into, because there's the story of lots of failed self-help attempts. Children find themselves dealing with hoarding parents and find the financial toll of their parents' stuff to be overwhelming. Fear for their safety. And then in the church, we found people that were hoarding there. And sometimes they would withdraw. And it would be after they had withdrawn from the activity that they loved so much that we would discover that they had this tremendous burden at home that had affected the way that they were coming out and present with other people. That's really a lot to bear, and it's hard to acknowledge and hard to understand, but affects every aspect of our relationships.
Can you talk a little bit about the cause of hoarding? Is it something like a trauma that happens to someone, which I could assume when they're a child or even as an adult, or is it something that's in our DNA, such as a mental illness, that it just might happen?
It is both of those. That we have learned that there are things that are going on in the brain that cause a person to have indecisiveness, to have trouble getting plans for how to deal with stuff in order. There is a trauma often will trigger what is already happening inside of the brain. I lead a group called Buried in Treasures. And in that group, one of the common themes is people have trouble making decisions about how to let go of things. And a lot of them speak of times when they did have a trauma that triggered them to be out of control in a way that they were not able to get back together. One person, for instance, had divorce, and when she moved out of the house and moved into a condominium, she moved all of those boxes, and they still sit in the middle of her room today because she just can't deal with the emotion and can't deal with the challenge of getting this out.
Can you talk a little bit about affluenza and its effect?
Recently, there was a case that is not the type of affluenza that I'm talking about. A young man used the affluenza defense to be able to say, I'm rich, I've been raised in this coddled way, and I don't have any sense of how to behave, and so I'm not responsible for my actions. This is not the type of affluenza that I'm talking about. Back in the 90s, there was a movement, and that term was coined. And it's basically talking about how to find ourselves grounded with voluntary simplicity in the midst of a world where it is so easy to have lots and lots and lots of things. We can acquire and buy things easier than ever before. Some of that buying, it's online, so 24/7 you can be shopping and getting things easily. There's also a concept of planned obsolescence. I had a lawnmower one time that someone gave to me. It was a snapper, and it ran like a charm. And if I would sharpen the blade every once in a while, it had a perfect cut. Well, 3 lawnmowers later, the person who gave me that lawnmower said, "Darn, I sure do wish I had never given you that lawnmower. I have been through 3, and that snapper is still running." Things are designed to break down today. And so if you have a lot of things broken down in your house, what do you do with that? How do you deal with having so many different things that no longer have meaning to us?
That brings up my next question. You know, I'm very passionate about being green, not only in organizing, but in my life as well. And, you know, a question that people often ask me is, you know, if you say you're being green, is that really another excuse to hold on to junk? So can you address the environmental concerns? Because I respect if someone's, just as you talked about the lawnmower, don't want to let things go, but they have these broken things in their house. What do you say to that?
There is a very challenging issue with environmentalism, because often those are beliefs that become in conflict with the person's goal of letting go of things. And in order to not fill the landfill, often a person's house will become a landfill in itself. And this is so sad to hear. And when people try to do recycling, it becomes overwhelming. Where do you recycle? Old videotapes was just the question that we were dealing with in our group. Where do you recycle old compact disc and these types of things? It's easy to know how to recycle paper, plastic, cardboard, etc. But when we get into trinkets and just the different things that we accumulate in life that will no longer sell, or you don't really find it a thing to donate, how do you deal with things that their next step is the landfill? If you have such environmental concerns that you don't want to fill the landfill. And it's sad to watch someone be in so much conflict as their house becomes increasingly full, but their value for environmentalism is in conflict with their belongings.
And in the area where I live, there's a place called the Scrap Exchange, and so that's a great resource, because what they do is they will throw birthday parties for kids who will come in and create things, or artists create things out of quote-unquote junk that other people have discarded. So that's for our community, that's a great resource. That's another way, and if they have those concerns, but not every community has that.
And one of the things that I teach is there are the 3 R's that we all know: reduce, recycle, reuse. But there's a 4th R that is important for people who have hoarding tendencies to learn, and that is refuse. Come into your house in the first place. One of the sad experiences is that people who already accumulate a whole lot of things become the dumping ground for family and friends for other things. Oh, so-and-so collects things, let's just give it to her. And that adds to the problem. And so learning how to refuse to bring things into the house is the first big step. Refusing relates to how we acquire and how we choose what even comes into our space to begin with.
I'm curious, do hoarders have co-occurring disorders? For instance, could you be a hoarder and also depressed, or a hoarder and suffer from anxiety, for example?
At the beginning, when hoarding was being researched, it was researched under the umbrella of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and the treatments early were ones that were effective with a person who had OCD. But after a while, they realized that these treatments weren't working for most people, and began learning new research that would allow them to do particularly cognitive behavioral therapy, in responding to the hoarding tendencies themselves. But one of the most common co-occurring disorders is depression. And over 50%, 57%, in fact, have a co-occurring depressive episode, clinical depression. And over 50% have social or generalized anxiety. We do find that about 17% of the population have a co-occurrence with obsessive compulsive disorder, which is lower than people expected. Sometimes there will be things, if you have OCD and don't want to touch things that have become dirty, then you can have things that accumulate under those circumstances. ADHD is another co-occurring disorder that often affects the decision-making ability and a person's way of processing. So even though you don't treat hoarding with medication, it's important, if you have a co-occurring disorder, to treat that with psychotherapy, with medication, with the things that are available to make a difference. It makes dealing with the hoarding easier.
How can you approach someone that you think might be a hoarder?
The first thing that I recommend is that you read a book by Michael Tompkins called Digging Out. It's a book on how to do harm reduction and to develop conversations that can first not address getting rid of things, but to address instead making passageways 2 feet wider all through the house, making sure that exits are not blocked, making sure that the stove is clear. And these are harm reduction strategies that allow you to address not getting rid of things, but being safe in your environment and more productive. So that's the first thing that I recommend. The second is learn how to anticipate crisis points that will come in a person's life. For instance, if you know that your mom is in poor health and at any time could have a medical emergency, that would be a time to prepare, saying what you will say when she falls and breaks a hip and has to come home, and prepare to do a clear out of her things to make it safe for her to be back, even though you know that won't affect the hoarding situation.
Resources, I think that's a great book to recommend for people to get started. But, as a professional organizer, it's expensive. One of the biggest things that would drive me nuts about these TV shows is in 48 minutes, because it's an hour, but we have the 12 minutes of commercials, this 3-story house that was filled to the gills is magically cleaned out in an hour. And so I think there's a huge misperception out there about the amount of time. And I would say this not only for hoarders, but when it comes to cleaning your garage or your closet, it takes more time. Now, I have to pay for services. So what other options are there for people who just like, we can't afford a professional organizer?
I love to do organizing of teams, and the person can find out what kind of support is available through the church, through family, through close friends, through people who have vested interest in my long-term health. And a professional organizer who is trained in working with people who hoard can be an effective team leader, and to work alongside a therapist who is addressing the deeper issues of the hoarding roots and the core values that are being affected. The professional organizer as team leader can, number one, train people for how to be present in the room. If I go into a place that is hoarded, I always ask permission to touch anything. And if I accidentally hit something with my arm, I will apologize for having touched this. It's very important to learn that even if things look of no value to us, they have value to the person who is there. And we aren't the ones that can assume what is trash and what is treasure. So with the team, I would become the point person, and everyone would come through me, and I would be the one who would take it to the person whose house we're working on and ask, do you want to keep this, or how would you like for this to be discarded? Because it can become very overwhelming when a lot of people are present. And you're right, that you can work and work and work and barely make a dent. I was in a house the other day and worked for 3 hours. We got the front door opened and were amazed at the corner that we cleared out by the window. It was wonderful work, and I felt so productive in it. And then I got home and I began looking at the pictures of this place and knew then that part of what we had done was organize the stacks into boxes. And after we had organized them into boxes, the boxes had to have some place to go temporarily. And so that went back into the place. It was real discouraging to look at that as I left, and this space that we had been able to sweep clean and dust down was filled again with these boxes. But I looked at the pictures of that area, and it was profound how different it was and how sorted it was. But it was just one small portion of the whole apartment that we were working in. Fortunately, I get to go back and work again, and we'll do the kitchen.
Did the book that you mentioned earlier, could someone read that, and when that helped them incorporate a plan, for instance, if they couldn't afford to hire you or someone else that works with hoarders, is that an option that could help them?
Digging Out is written by Michael Tompkins, and he does conversations that you can have. It's based on motivational coaching, motivational interviewing, and we ask open-ended questions using I statements, using positive statements, where we connect with the person. He's asked us to do an exercise called the big picture. And you do a column of things I dislike about this person and things I like about this person. And then add up 100% where you know exactly what you dislike about this person at 100% and exactly what you like about this person at 100%. And this way you can see small things sometimes take up more room in our relationship than they ought to take up. And when these small things become the only thing we can see, then we're missing the big picture of the relationship that we have. So Michael Tompkins is good at helping us get to the bigger picture of our relationship that sometimes gets completely lost because we're caught in the clutter and caught in the stuff.
Are there any books that you recommend, again, for someone who maybe is like, I can't afford the services, I'm going to try to help the relatives, so that sounds like a first step, but maybe a step-by-step guide? I don't know if you've written anything or there's anything out there.
The step-by-step guide for people who themselves hoard is called Buried in Treasures. And this is also a helpful book for people who are concerned about another person's hoarding to read. There are little fact files in the midst of it for family and coaches and friends. Buried in Treasures is a workbook, and the workbook is so good at letting people get into what are their thoughts and feelings and emotions and actions, and how can we re-examine those in ways that cause us to treat ourselves with deeper kindness and cause us to accept ourselves not as a person who hoards, but as a person who is strong, capable, positive. And in this group that I lead called Buried in Treasures, the courage of these people to examine the roots of their lives and to go into the traumas that they have experienced previously is phenomenal. And they don't find a lot of change in the clutter by the time we have finished this 15 weeks, but they have found so much change in self-acceptance and in understanding what the dilemma is.
That's fantastic, but that's why I do this show, Clearing the Clutter Inside and Out, because my goal is for people to figure out what is the clutter about, whether emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, and then release that and then be able to move forward. Now, I'm curious, can you give an example or two of absolutely what not to do? Because I've been working with the hoarder because, my philosophy in life in general is the physician's one, do no harm. And so it's something that I'm very serious about. And I think a lot of people, even with well intentions, can do things that can throw someone back. Even if they start to make progress, just make them withdraw. So what are some things that people should absolutely not do?
You should absolutely not think that this person is lazy, because this is not a matter of willpower and just being able to suck it up and get this stuff done. One woman in our group has been able to go and clean out her parents' place very effectively. She can do it, she can make decisions, she can do every single thing that's needed, and their place has now been cleared out and has become safe for the medical people that come in and give them day-to-day support. Can she do this to her house? No. There's this mental block where she is in distress about her things, and she can't make happen for herself what she can easily make happen for other people. Sometimes she gets too caught in the emotions of memories from the past. She's had a lot of trauma in her life, this particular person. And in the divorce that she went through, she lost so much. And now what she has is of such importance and value that she can't begin to comprehend letting go of those things. So if it were a matter of willpower, most people would have changed by now, and their situation would be very different. So number one, do not say, this person is lazy. Or as one person said, oh, you're from the lazy side of the family. Yeah, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, it breaks my heart, actually.
Yes, it does break my heart, too. The other thing is, don't touch things. When you go in, if there's what we call a goat path that's 15 inches wide, and you're having to be careful to go through and not touch things, try not to. And if you are going to touch something, ask permission first. Say, may I move this so that I can sit down? And asking permission is number one. Don't remove anything without permission. Sometimes people will think, I can just take out a bag every week, and they don't know what's here, so it won't matter. A hoarder does not see things in a linear way like most people do. Instead, they see things in a spatial way. If I were to ask you if you had a stack that was 16 inches high of papers on your table, where is your electric bill? You could say, oh, I think it's about 6 inches down on the right side of the table toward the front. And so spatially, they can get in touch with where things are. They can just spatially tell. So don't take things. That's the point of this story. Because it looks like it's chaotic, but it's not chaotic in the mind of the person, because this is how they are visualizing their stuff.
What would you say to someone who might be watching or listening and they think they might be a hoarder?
There is a website called the International Obsessive Compulsive Foundation, IOCDF Foundation. And so if they go to the web address ocfoundation.org/hoarding, ocfoundation.org/hoarding, they will find the most up-to-date information about this, including some tests that they can take to find out how their space ranks and whether or not they have a problem. They can also find videos that describe the characteristics and let them get in touch with their own feelings about this. Second, I recommend buying the book Buried in Treasures, and if possible, join a group. I would love to start a virtual Buried in Treasures group. So if anyone listens to this and thinks, well, I'm not in Nashville, so I can't go to your group, reach out to me anyway, because if I had 5 people that were interested in doing this virtually, I would start another group at no cost, just because I want people to know that there is hope and they don't have to stay in the patterns that they're in. Ask yourself, how well do I make decisions? Because people who hoard have trouble making decisions. When you go out to dinner, do you have trouble figuring out what to order from the menu? Do you have trouble deciding where you're going to go to begin? This decision making gets compounded in a hoarding situation. So that might be something that you would notice about yourself.
What are your thoughts that we as a society or in our individual communities need to do to start working with hoarders? You know, at the beginning I mentioned that statistic, and I had tried to find an up-to-date one, but that was back in 2009, and that's just one city. I mean, I love how you've talked about connections and things, but there's also that cost of hoarding.
A study in Melbourne, Australia, said that the cost for firefighters in responding to a home that has been hoarded is 8 times the normal cost for response. A lot of city governments end up being faced with having to condemn houses that have become so overwhelmed with the clutter and have become damaged by all sorts of water damage, roofs that were not repaired, broken windows. Repairs get deferred when a person is hoarding, and this often causes a lot of complex problems that would have been avoided if small things could have been done early on. It's not unusual for the city to have to deal with a place that has become condemned. That adds taxpayer dollars. The house where I was talking about working so much in that one front was with the Metro Housing Authority, doing some work pro bono for them. There's just tremendous cost, financial cost and burden to the city, not to mention the burden to family members when they find themselves in a situation. One time a woman's sister died suddenly and sadly, and it was at that point that she learned that the family home had been hoarded and was no longer inhabitable. And the shock on her face and the loss of so many layers of security and a sense of home and family became devastating. I was able to go in from the front of the house to the back in 3 hours to find out what the situation was that was not visible from the front door. Later, I'm happy to say she got a team from her church and other family members, and they were able to save that house, and it's a wonderful place now. I want to increase awareness of hoarding among the community, so I speak to civic groups and church groups and psychotherapist associations and try to raise awareness that hoarding not only is a mental health disorder, but also that hoarding has some treatments now that are effective and can make a difference in a person's life. This is new. Being able to treat the hoarding is something that is fairly recent in our understanding, and I find great hope in that.
Wonderful. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share on hoarding as a community issue?
Well, I would like to tell you about a processional that the early church used to do called the Tripudium. They would process into church by going 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. And they did this until they had come in and faced the altar and then went and took their place. The reason they did this was to remind themselves that our life isn't a steady progression. Our life is a progression of going forward and going backwards, going forward and going backwards. And as long as we keep our eyes focused on the place that we intend to go, in the church it was the altar or to the place of God, but in the hoarder's life, as long as we keep our eyes faced in the direction that we're going to, even if we backslide and go back 2 steps or 3 steps or 4 steps, As long as we don't physically turn away from the direction that we intend to go, then we're going to be continuing to make progress. So don't be afraid of backsliding. Don't be afraid if it takes a long time. Just keep your eye on the prize.
Excellent. Now, I always like to ask this, any final tip on any area of clutter and helping people eliminate it?
Ask this one question when you see something that you're wondering about. Is this item more important than the real estate place that it's taking in my house? Is this item more important than the space it's occupying? And if the answer is no, then it's time to discard or throw away or recycle that item.
Fantastic. Now, Susan, how can people learn more information about you?
They can go to my website, clearingthewayhome.com, and feel free to call me, and we can talk about your own personal situations.
Thanks again to today's sponsor, RYB Professional Writing Services. They are certified professional grant writers and also pen press releases and social media copy to get the word out about your business. For more information, please visit reawakenyourbrilliance.com/writing. I want to thank everyone for listening. So go out there, release some clutter to create the life you deserve and desire.
Thanks for joining us on Clearing the Clutter Inside and Out. You can find out more about Julie Coraccio and her services at reawakenyourbrilliance.com. We'll see you here next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Remember, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step.